Hi everyone, so let's now take a look at contractionary fiscal policy. So when it comes to contractionary fiscal policy, we're obviously dealing with a tightening of taxation, an increased level of taxation or reduced government expenditure. At times they may be both used and of course this will really depress aggregate demand in the economy. So this is therefore going to be used in very, very particular circumstances where it's used to prevent overheating in the economy and maintain more sustainable trend rate economic growth. So if aggregate demand is very, very high, perhaps household debt ratios have very much increased, then there may be real concerns about demand pull inflation in the economy, and therefore there may possibly be the need to actually rectify that situation and reduce that level of aggregate demand. Okay, so if we just consider the potential implications on straightforward aggregate demand, aggregate supply diagram, well, we can see that the impact is likely to be as so. So moving from AD1 to AD2, the aggregate demand curve shifts to the left because, of course, government expenditure being reduced is one of our key components of aggregate demand. Now, in addition, an increase in taxation will also serve to actually reduce disposable income, and that's likely to have an impact on the marginal propensity to consume as well. So yeah, we can see that therefore the economy moves to a much lower price point in this model. Okay, meanwhile real GDP is of course also reduced from Y1 to Y2. So we see that scenario breaking out right here. We see a reduction in aggregate demand causing that lower price level and reduced real GDP. Okay, so what are the potential arguments in favour of doing so? Well, obviously you want to prevent that overheating, you want to prevent a really, really nasty bubble forming in the economy. Because of course bubbles don't just sort of gradually open, they burst. So that's going to be the number one reason, but beyond that it may also enable the government to actually run a fiscal surplus, and this is what is often argued should be done at times of sustained economic growth. It's also going to of course reduce that demand pull inflation, as we've said, because aggregate demand is going to be reduced. Furthermore, the actual disposable income is going to be reduced, and it's also going to reduce the risk of crowding out as well, which is another interesting argument. So the fact now that the government isn't borrowing as much money is likely to therefore mean that there's more money available for the private sector at cheaper borrowing costs, and it may well actually crowd in the private sector by reducing government expenditure. So that's another interesting area. There's also the argument regarding maintaining the trend rate of economic growth, that this enables more sustainable growth to be maintained. But you can also of course question whether whether or not it is sufficient just to rely upon those automatic fiscal stabilisers that we've discussed before. Now, arguments against, well, we've seen that increasing the taxation beyond a certain level really goes against generating greater tax revenue, as was highlighted on the Laffer curve. So there's that argument that you can make, but in addition to that, you've got to think also about the impact on incentives. So when it comes to increasing taxation, direct taxation on workers, if you do that, that may well have an effect on incentives. Furthermore, it may have an impact upon firms as well, because if you increase corporation tax, it may actually mean they have less retained profit to actually reinvest in capital goods to develop their future productivity. Okay, so that's a nice argument to consider. You've also got to think about the impact on welfare provision here, because if government expenditure is falling, which areas are going to be cut? There could be a negative multiplier effect here as well, because that reduced government expenditure may mean, of course, that certain groups in society are benefiting from the money that they were previously receiving. Then there's the chance of policy overshoot, that you could go too far with this this sort of process, and that could turn us into a sort of negative output gap from a positive output gap. And then, of course, yeah, we mentioned those Laffer curve implications there. Okay, so let's just finish this off in style with a bit of evaluation. So, of course, when it comes to time lags, that's an important one. How rapid is the growth, and therefore how sustainable or unsustainable is that likely to be? Is the use of monetary policy going to be more likely? In most circumstances, governments do rely upon monetary policy changes and just do a little bit of fine-tuning, so to speak, with regards to fiscal policy. Okay, and certainly history suggests monetary policy and fine-tuning are more likely. Okay, just coming back to this point about incentives, this is another area you'd be able to target within your evaluation here as well, and you'd be able to perhaps recommend that taxation should be applied to particular areas, those people that are doing particularly well in a boom period. So it might be that you want to impose wealth taxes, possibly, as opposed to direct income and corporation taxes, because that helps to avoid some of the incentives problem. Okay, so that's another nice sophisticated point to consider as a recommendation there. Okay, right, that's it though, guys. Thanks a lot.